I don't want to do a suspension explanation video, as that doesn't really help. Having the information is good, but it's not useful knowledge if you don't know what values to actually adjust through when adjusting the suspension. So I'm going to do a suspension, what do you call it, the suspension adjustment process video, where I'm just going to tune this Porsche Carrera, whatever RS, I think that's what it says on the bumper, a 95 I think, with the Comfort Soft tires, because that is probably close to a compound that the car might actually run, being from 1995. The newer cars would probably run a Michelin Pilot Sport Cup range of tires, whether it be the RRs or some lower street version. But this car would probably run something like a Comfort Soft tire in this game. So the first thing to do, I'm going to show the settings, is to drive the car. I've bought some mods already, so I don't have to go to the menu and buy them, which are the suspension mods and differential mods and brake controller mods, which I'm going to turn this off just in case there's any difference between a normal 0 and with the controller in 0. And as you can see, there's no car mods, no horsepower, no weight reduction, nothing else. And these are the stock settings I can't change. And the first drive, I'm just going to do one lap because I'm going to try to keep the video short. This video is probably going to end up being pretty long. Oh. And as you can see, with the Comfort tires, sliding is actually really easy. I don't have the counter steer assist on. I'm just driving with a wheel. I don't know where to brake. Okay, it's close to that second to last board, so it's sliding real nice. So I can drift the car. Oh, it's a little difficult. The suspension is still really soft. I don't trust smashing the throttle in a drift yet. I've done a lap in this car already, so I know what it drives like. As you can see, it slides just fine with the Comfort Soft tires. With the sports tires and racing tires, it's a little different, but I chose the Comfort tires for this specific reason, in that the car does slide controllably with the lower grade tires. As you can see, I'm sliding the car intentionally. So there, at high speed, it gets into a wobble because the suspension is too soft. But anyway, I'm sliding the car just for entertainment and a display of how the car handles beyond the limit. I wouldn't actually try to drive this way if I'm trying to put down a fast lap. Somewhere around here. So this is a manual car, so I'm using the manual stick shifts. And as you can see, if I pull it out of gear, it goes into neutral. And if I try to put it into gear without pressing the clutch, it just does gear grinding sounds. Nice and oversteer. This is how the car should drive, and it's controllable. This is how a Porsche should drive. I mean, these suspension settings, the stock settings, are usually not exact to what was in the original vehicle, at least from my experience with other cars, so it doesn't have the actual stock suspension settings. And there's a slow lap, sliding the car around and testing the gearing and everything. let's go see what we can do to the car. So what I noticed with that lap was that the car was easily slidable. Not just easy to catch, but easily to put into a slide. So I don't want a fast car to be too easy to slide. I want it to grip. And I noticed on the brakes, it wants to oversteer. Press the brakes. Actually, I'll continue driving to show what I'm talking about. So I'm braking into this corner and it rotates. Well, it's pretty slow, so is this first gear? No, it's second gear. That's not, oh, slide it on throttle. So that's giving it too much throttle and it's uncatchable, which might still be a problem with the tires, but in low angle slides, it slides really nice. So I'm gonna brake into this corner, put it in second gear, no, third gear. And I'm on the brakes and it's rotating a lot. These are the default settings as well, just on the comfort soft tire. I'll brake into this corner and show the rotation. Oh, it didn't shift up. Brake a little fast and it's rotating on the brakes. I actually like that performance feature. I don't want to tune it out altogether. I want it to do a little bit of that for my driving style. And my driving style is to rotate the car on the brakes, have a little bit of mid-corner understeer, and then a good neutral throttle out attitude of the car. And so, taking note of the car performance on the brakes, it was oversteering on the brakes. So what I'm going to do, what's the previous setting? So it was 205, 235, and 255 in the rear. I don't know what was the rear in the normal setting. 225. Okay, well it's stiffer, so I'll just leave it where it is. However, I would like to change the cambers. The cambers might change the performance a lot. So I'll get to that after I get the spring set, even though it's going to change the settings anyway, but I'll just drive. At 235 in the front, 2.35 natural frequency in hertz in the front spring. So as you can see, it's rotating on the brakes. Off throttle, it slides very nicely. Brake at the board here. Odd rotation on the brakes. Pitched it sideways on purpose. Stay in second. Rotation. So I've concluded with just a couple corners, and this corner that I'm not really supposed to slow down in, that the car is still oversteering too much on the brakes. Now that can be due to brake bias or suspension stiffness, including anti-roll. I don't want to change too much to not make this confusing. I already know how I want the car to perform because I've tuned the other Porsche, the 09 or something like that. 2009 911 is the one that I tuned. So this is too soft. I'm just going to increase it to a random value. And I'm picking somewhere in the 50s, or that's higher. This is a 230 something. Let's go exactly 250, or 2.5 hertz. Just a random value, and start. I really only need to test the brakes in this one corner if I want to do this quick. So it's still rotating. The game was kind of lagging in frames. It was frame lag, but it didn't have feedback lag. Strange. So what I'm looking for right now, so that's enough. I don't need to do any more corners. What I'm looking for right now is understeer on the brakes. So I know at what point the car starts to understeer. So let's go to 270. There might be a faster method. It depends on where you think the value is going to end up. I could go to a maximum of 3.65 hertz and then back it off from there if it's too stiff, which it probably is. But I'm not doing that method right now. I'm just going up little by little in larger increments. I mean, that was an increment of 20 just now, from 30-ish to 50-ish to 70-ish, about 20, or 0.2 I should say. So they're stable, but then it snaps. It's stable on initial turn-in, but then it snaps. That's a sign that the spring is too stiff, but then the brake bias is too far rearward. I actually like a rearward brake bias, but this is still too far rearward because it's stable, and then it wants to rotate as I give it more brake. Excuse me. I got saliva in my throat. So it wants to rotate as I give it more brake pressure rather than just understeer as I give it more brake pressure. So it's doing that. But I could still go stiffer with the front spring. It is a little bit stiff. I'm going to leave it where it is for now, but I'm going to adjust the rear brake bias, which I can do. No, I can't do it, but it's not working. Oh, I don't have the controller on. I need to turn on the controller. I can do that live while driving the car, the brake bias that is, once I install the brake controller. So the wheel is very clicky. That's what those clicking sounds. It's the directional button. I would use the controller normally for doing this, but I don't want to bump the cable for the microphone that's attached to the controller. Alright, so the brake controller, which is not the game controller, I'm going to set it to maximum forward. Let's see what that does. Third. Now it's understeering. As you can see, I'm turning the wheel, pressing the brakes, and it's understeering. So what I'm going to do is move the brake bias back. So I'm going to go to 2, which is 3 points back from -5. I'm going to brake into this turn. It's a straight line, so I can't really tell right now. And it's doing that thing where as I give it more brake pressure, it's oversteering. Oops, don't want to do that. That's just throttle. I'm not testing a throttle right now, I'm just doing the brakes. This is where I start. Every car I tune is on the front springs. And there are steps that I skip that I'm not doing for this video because I usually like a lot of anti-roll, because it's commonly known that tire load sensitivity affects the maximum grip. Oh, I need to drive. I just adjust it here. So tire load sensitivity affects the maximum grip of the car. And so if you can run the most stiff anti-roll bar that is safe to drive in the mechanical range on the car, then you can get more grip out of the car because it distributes the load across the left and right tires. So I always increase the rear anti-roll to maximum anti-roll stiffness in whatever game I'm playing, which in some games might be too high, but I test it out anyway because it's a simulator. I don't have to buy any parts. I can do that test for free. It just takes time. And in this game, I've noticed that the anti-roll is set to 10 in most cars. It's not all cars, but most cars, 10 is not stiff enough. So it's 10, see, I changed the brake bias, by the way. Now it's rotating comfortably on the brakes. As I give it more brake pressure, it's not snapping, but it's still rotating at -4, that's forward, as you can see on the right. So I would like to keep this to suspension only, but I might change the I might change the, whatchamacallit, the differentials. So right now I can't adjust the brake bias any more forward because I just showed that all the way forward, well, in this corner from the first lap, causes understeer, right? Understeer. I lift it off. So if I trail brake properly, it will understeer. Let me show that again. Right here on the straight. So fourth gear, mash the brakes and turn, understeer, right? And then at -4, get it going up to speed, brake for the corner, brake in a straight line, and turn. It understeered at too much pressure and then rotates really nice. While shell braking properly. So if it's rotating a little too much at a good brake bias, which is, I'm going to choose -4, I need more front spring actually. So at -5 it was understeering on the brakes, at 4 it's oversteering a little too much on the brakes. So I don't have the adjustability to go between -5 and -4. So I have to tune out the oversteer with either the differentials or the suspension. And I would get to anti-roll bars, but I'm not going to do that right now. So I'm going to increase this to 90. Another 0.2 increase. I want to make big adjustments right now because it's faster. If I did single point in increments, it would take a really long time to find the ideal value. So there's understeering on the brakes. Oh, I'm still at 5, that's why. So let's try that again. At -4 instead of -5. Oops, missed the gear. Okay, it's nice and stable, and then as I come off the brakes, it's getting good rotation, or I should say too much rotation coming off the brakes. So if I'm getting rotation coming off the brakes, that's a problem with the differential. The only way to tune out brake lift, I don't know what to call it, brake lift oversteer is with the initial torque of the differential. So as I come off the brakes, it wants to rotate too much. So I guess I will tune the differential in this video because I want to make the car perform at least pretty well. I'm not going to tune it all the way to optimized settings for the sake of the length of the video. So really good rotation on the brakes. So now the differential. Let's just move on to the differential. The spring rate is not optimized yet. It's pretty good at 2.9 hertz. 2.9 hertz is pretty good for these settings right now. And now to tune the initial torque. So this is why differential settings are dependent on the springs. So I wouldn't know, what am I trying to say? I wouldn't know what value to set the initial torque until I adjusted the front spring. So I don't actually know what the value for the initial torque should be either right now, but I can test out what works with this front spring, only because I know what the front spring range I need to be in. It's going to be close to 2.9, maybe 2.8 something, maybe 2.9 something, depending on how much oversteer or understeer I want to put in the car. Obviously stiffer is generally more understeer, and softer is generally more oversteer. So just using the brakes, it's very stable now on the brakes. And it's still, the front end still turns in while being stable on the brakes because the differential is limiting the rotation. So it's only set to 60 value. It's not set to, I'm assuming that's not 100% at 60 value. It's not, doesn't say percent either, so we don't know if it's 60%. But it's set to a value below 100%, that is at the maximum the game will allow. So here we go, adjusting the brakes here in a corner I normally wouldn't brake in. So it's getting good turn in, but it feels limited on the brakes. And that'd be the front spring, and coming off the brakes is what is a symptom I was trying to solve anyway, not being on the brakes. But coming off the brakes was a symptom I was trying to solve. And it's not oversteering coming off the brakes anymore. I broke a little late. So I'm coming off the brakes, and it's not oversteering. I'm jabbing the brakes really sloppily, and it's still not oversteering. So that's a sign that the initial torque is too locked. Oh, oops, pressed the wrong button. So it was at a really low number, so I'm just going to go to half of 60, which doesn't even go to 0 anyway, but I'm going to go half of 60 at 30. That achieves a big range of adjustment, so I can arrive at the optimum settings faster. Again, if I were to adjust it one increment at a time, lowering it from 60, it would take a really long time to get even close to the optimum setting. But if I make a big jump in the value, then I can tell if it's too open or too locked easily. So at 30 is where I'm going. All right. Third gear. Coming off the brakes. Still understeering. Whoop, too much throttle. That's throttle input. Not tuning throttle yet. So the reason why I start with the brakes is because even though the brakes don't make the car move forward, the brakes are still more important than the power performance, the performance on power. So the performance on the brakes is more important than the performance on power, because it's what slows the car down, and you want the car to slow down in a controlled manner while it is moving. So if the car oversteers on the brakes, and let's say it's a regular daily driver, that's not a very good car to drive daily, because if you're in a sudden stopping situation and you're not prepared for the oversteer, then it could cause a worse problem by pressing the brakes. So anyway, controlled brakes is more important than power or performance. Okay, so it's still not rotating the way I want. So I think what it is, based on those limited tests on several corners, is the initial torque is too locked because it's not rotating as I'm coming off the brakes. I want a little bit of rotation on the brakes, or off the brakes. And it's also understeering while I'm on the brakes. So when I'm coming off the brakes, it's understeering, or not getting enough rotation as I want. And when I'm on the brakes, it's not getting enough rotation that I'm seeking to tune into the car. So I'm going to tune this down to 15 here. And because I know the suspension is too stiff, I can make this adjustment for me personally. I'm not confused as to what's doing what. I know what setting is changing the performance of the car. So I'm going to tune this to 8.8. So we were at 2.7, then we went up to 2.9, now I'm going to 2.8, right in the middle of the previous change. And so I made two adjustments, which is not smart to do, but for the sake of the length of the video, I need to make as many adjustments as possible while not being too confusing. So I'm going to test the brakes. So on the brakes is understeering. Oh. Now you need to test the brakes coming off the brakes. Nope, missed the gear. So it's getting rotation coming off the brakes. Oh, I'm still at the wrong setting. I'm going to go change that. So it's understeering on the brakes because the brake value was not adjusted, which was probably wrong in the previous test as well. So I don't even know if I made the right adjustment with the suspension. So I'm going to change this, not on the live setting, but in the sheet, so that it stays at -4. And I'll rename this settings sheet. This is Comfort Softs. I'll change it to CS for Comfort Soft. That's how I personally name the settings. CS. And this is just, I'm going to say track. CK. Track, and then 101 for the first, 100, 101. First generation, first iteration. I'm not going to save every change that I do, which I would do in a different sim that has on a PC where you can save as many files as you want. This has limited setup sheets, so I'm not going to change the name every time I make an adjustment. So let's try that again. I'm going to leave it as it was, even though I don't know what the front suspension should have been because I was testing the wrong brake pressure or brake bias. But I'm going to leave it where it's at. So it is understeering on the brakes still. So I need to go down from 2.8. And I haven't made any differential adjustments for the brakes. So more brakes causes understeer. And it's not rotating coming off the brakes either. And with the Porsche, on initial torque, this is supposed to be third. The initial torque on a Porsche should be fairly low because that affects the performance of the car a lot in other parts of the corner other than the entry. So that's some rotation coming off the brakes and then understeer getting back on the brakes. I don't know if you could see the difference in the rotation of the car there, but it started to rotate as I came off the brakes, and then I pressed the brakes harder again and it understeered. So what that shows me is the suspension is still too stiff and the differential initial torque is somewhere in a good spot. I'm going to leave it there because if it's really close to optimum settings, it's going to take a lot of fine-tune adjustments to find the perfect setting, and it's going to take a really long time for me to just find the best initial torque, even when I don't have the ideal suspension settings yet either. So the differentials are dependent on the suspension, and if I don't have ideal suspension settings, then I can't achieve ideal differential settings. So, but you kind of have to adjust both at the same time because it's an open loop system that every value changes the way the whole car performs, and it gets very convoluted when you're making too many changes at once. But like I said, I generally know what I want this car to perform like. So I know the feeling of the car that I want, but I don't know the values of the numbers that achieve the feeling of the performance that I want. So that's where all the testing comes in play.